Hey guys, it's Kyle down here at Lunicycle. Today I'm going to talk to you about noises on full suspension bikes. Now on full suspension bikes there's a lot going on. You have all these little pivots with moving parts, and I've worked in the industry a long time. All full suspension bikes will eventually make noise. Now I'm going to talk to you today about two different fixes for this. We're going to do a quick fix on our X1 bike with just some oil, and then we're going to go ahead and show you how to do a more long-term fix with grease, and we'll do that on the X2. Now, all full suspension bikes will eventually make noise if you ride them. Dirt and water get inside of all the little pivot areas, and that causes noise. Now on full suspension bikes, that noise gets echoed. It's like a drum in here. There's lots of dead space, so any noise gets amplified many times through carbon frames. If any guys own carbon wheels, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. Shifting gears on carbon wheels echoes like crazy through the room. Now, here at Luna, we don't recommend any of our electric bikes to be sprayed hard with a hose. So the best way to clean your bike, especially your full suspension bike, is with a rag and a spray bottle. You can use just a mild soapy water, or I can put a link in the description for a few of the more bike specific cleaners that we use around here. One I really like is called Muck Off, and we'll put a link up for that. So we're going to start with our X1 bike here, and I'll point out some of the common areas that make noise, and we'll also put up a list of the tools you'll need. Put a list of the tools for the X1 and the X2. They're basically the same bike, you just require separate tools. So if you want to come on and get in here, Ramsey, I'm going to show you some of the common areas that make noise on this guy and how to do a quick fix on these. So the most common area to make noise on the X1 bike and the X2 is the lower shock pivot. So you got a lot going on here. You have metal spacers on bushings, on the shock. Now, a real quick fix for this is to loosen this bolt and spray some oil in here. You can use Tri-Flow, you can use WD-40, you can use basically any type of spray oil or even a drip oil, and that will get rid of the creaky noise. It may just not last as long as some of the waterproof greases. So, a quick fix for a noise right here. I'm going to go ahead and use the T30 tool and loosen this pivot bolt. I'm going to then spray some oil on all the little pieces in here. Wipe off all the extra. Then I'm going to go ahead and cycle this a few times and then tighten the bolt back up. Now on all the bolts on this bike, they're an 8 Newton meter torque spec. It's actually printed on the stock bolts. This one has our titanium bolt upgrade kit, so it doesn't say 8 Newton meters on it anymore. So 8 Newton meters. If you don't have a torque wrench, that's tight but not too tight. Now, the other tool which you will need for getting oil in between these guys is a T50. It's the star style. It's one of the bigger ones. So this is a very common noise area. If you spray some oil on here, chances are that's going to get rid of your noise. If that doesn't do it, then go ahead and check this area down here. This is another common noise area, and we're going to go ahead and do a complete overhaul on this pivot. We'll just do it up in the stand on the X2 bike. It's a very similar bike, very similar procedure. So I'm just going to loosen this up. Go ahead and spray some oil down in this little contact area here. This is where there's parts making contact. There's also some bearings in there. I'm going to go ahead and cycle that a few times and then tighten it back up. And if that doesn't fix your noise, the final one to check is this guy here. This one also seems to make noise quite a bit. Same procedure. This one has a slotted nut on the back, so you can just loosen this a few turns. Go ahead and squirt some oil in these pivots here. Cycle it. And crank it back down. Now this is a trick mechanics have been using for years. If they get a guy that doesn't want to pay for a full suspension, re-grease and cleaning, they'll just loosen the pivots, spray some oil in there and send him on his way. That'll usually last until he sprays his bike down with a hose again. So biggest thing you want to avoid is using any high pressure water on any of these. The water is going to carry dirt with it, it's going to get in there and it's just going to make noise. It happens on all full suspension bikes. Now you may see pros pressure washing their bikes after races. Those guys have a team of mechanics and they're going to take this apart and overhaul it whenever he wants. So it's okay to do if you have a team of mechanics, but we really don't recommend a hose or a pressure washer ever on any of our electric bikes. All right guys, so we got our X2 bike up at the work stand. We're gonna do a more proper overhaul on this linkage system. We're gonna be using a waterproof grease. I prefer Park's Polylube. It's got good water resistance. There is other greases out there that guys like to use. Some guys use full-blown bearing grease, the Phil Wood stuff. We're gonna go ahead and put a link in the description to a few different greases you can buy. Now, before I get started on this is much more advanced. If you're not confident working on your bike, don't even attempt this. I've done lots of these. I may be dropping spacers on the ground. I may lose a spacer. All these little linkage parts are very hard for even us to get. So I'm doing this video for information purposes. If you are confident enough to do it, go ahead. If not, take it to a local bike shop. They're very, very confident on working on full suspension mountain bikes. They won't charge you more than, it's $80 to a little over $100 to re-grease all your pivots. If you roll in there and say, oh, my linkage is making noise, then they'll know, oh, this guy knows what he's talking about. He wants his linkage overhauled so it's not making noise. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started. I'm gonna do a few of the common pivots on the X2 here. I'm not gonna do all of them because this would be a 45-minute video. So I'm gonna go ahead and just start by removing the rear wheel. If you can't remove your rear wheel, you shouldn't be trying to overhaul your suspension. So I'm just gonna drop the rear wheel off and set it aside. Now, because I'm gonna be releasing this shock, you're gonna wanna go ahead and put a little rag right here because it may scratch your carbon. Now I'm going to start with this pivot right here. Now there's no bearings in this pivot, it's just two aluminum bushings. This will apply to the X1 also. You would just use different tools. They're very similar bikes, they just use different tools. So we'll go ahead and put up a shot of the tools you'll need for X2. For this particular one, we're going to start with a 5mm hex. We'll go ahead and take this bolt all the way out. Now, I went ahead and chose our dirtiest bike. This bike just came back from Sea Otter, so it could use a little bit of cleaning. So once I've got that bolt out, I'm gonna go ahead and wipe off any dirt that we have on this bushing here, and also in this area. This one really wasn't very dirty at all. And I'm gonna go ahead and put a little bit of our Polylube. This is a waterproof grease. This will last quite a bit longer than the little oil trick. You're gonna wanna just get this surface right here where it's gonna make contact with the rest of the frame. You're gonna do that on both sides. And then I wait till I reinstall it before I wipe off the extra. So with the rear wheel off, it's pretty easy to get this realigned. And again, reinsert bolt. Now, one thing I do want to mention is do have blue Loctite on them. If you've noticed that Loctite's come off or whatnot, you may want to apply some more. This bike uses blue Loctite on these pivots and then red Loctite down on some of the other main pivots. I'll put a link in the description for some of the Loctites used on this bike. So for this one, it says 6 Newton meters. which is basically the same as your stem, so not super tight. And I'm gonna go ahead and wipe off this extra grease. If you don't wipe it off, it's just gonna attract dirt. Be a little tricky to get it all out of there, but you do want to take your time when it comes to linkage work like this. So that was one of the easier ones. Another common one that makes noise is this main pivot. Now I'm gonna go ahead and rotate this whole stand so you can see what I'm doing. This is basically the same as the X1, except for you use different tools. This one requires an 8mm hex. Go ahead and crack this loose. This one's very tight. Before we ship these out, we crank these down to about 15. We just don't want these coming loose. Now this big main pivot has a bolt, 2 spacers, and 2 bearings, which you will see in 1 second. So before you start pulling out any of these other pivot bolts, go ahead and clean the floor, because there are some tiny spacers that may fall on the ground and you really don't want to lose them. Like I said, they are hard to get. They're hard for even us to get. So I'm gonna go ahead and completely pull this bolt out. This guy's right here. And then you will see, if you can get in there, you got a spacer, a bearing, and then on the other side you'll have an identical spacer and an identical bearing. And these have some of the original grease from the factory on them still. You can go ahead and clean that grease off. And I'm gonna wanna wipe all the dirt out of there. This bike really hasn't been ridden too much, so it's really not too dirty. Now you may see in some videos guys popping this seal off and overhauling the bearings. I could show you how to do that real quick right now. You just need a razor blade. But chances are these bearings are not gonna cause noise. It takes a long time for these to go bad. Usually it's just dirt and debris in here that causes the noise. If you clean it out and re-grease it, that will take care of your noise. But if you're curious, you can just take the little cover off of the bearing here. This one's brand new, so I'm not even gonna mess with it. But you would just blow some compressed air in there, clean out all the old grease, and then pack it full of fresh bearing grease. And then watch how easy this cover just goes back on. You take it, just push it on with your fingers. So you could actually do a bearing overhaul right there if you felt like it. But it's gonna be years before those bearings go bad, even if you ride a lot. I'm gonna take and clean these little spacers. Now you may be a little confused. Which direction do these spacers go? So the flat side goes out. The smaller, like tapered side presses onto the bearing itself, and then the flat side rests against the chainstay. So it's gonna be the exact same for these pivots. These ones have the identical aluminum spacers in between them. And then the flat side goes out, and then the tapered side touches on the bearing itself. I'm gonna go ahead and put a little grease on the bearing itself. Do that on both sides. And if you have grease on there, that's actually going to help you with the reassembly on this. It's going to help hold these aluminum spacers in place. So now you have to get 2 spacers in there and then get the bolts in there and tighten it. It can be a little tricky. Even the pros may need to do this a few times. I'm going to get 1 spacer in there, and I'm going to try to get the second spacer in there. at the same time. And they both need to go on at the same time, and they can't really move out of your way. So it, like I said, this is not for just your average shop mechanic. Now you may notice you got a bunch of extra grease in there. You can kind of wipe that off. We'll go ahead and reinstall this main bolt. See, something's not lining up, so I'm gonna pull this out. Spacer on that side wasn't quite sitting right, so let's try reinstalling this again. All right, I think we got it lined up. Let's try to tighten this up again. There we go. Now at Luna, we're gonna tighten this main pivot down to at least 15 Newton meters. This is the big one. We want this one really tight. There we go. It's gonna push a bunch of extra grease out the end here. I'm just gonna wipe that off. And that's the overhaul of the main pivot. If you want, I could show you another little spot that can't make noise. It's not part of the suspension. It's gonna be in between the derailleur hanger and the frame itself. And for that, you're gonna need to loosen this with an 8mm. On the X1, this is just a big 19mm. You would use a socket. And then you do need a tiny 2.5 right here. I believe I have one of those in my pocket. Now this isn't part of your suspension at all, but it is a part I've noticed that can make noise. Go ahead and take this tiny little safety bolt out. I'm going to remove the hanger itself. All right, so that's your derailleur hanger. Dirt and debris can also get in there when you're pedaling. This can actually be the cause of a creaky noise. It's pretty simple. Go ahead and put the grease on the frame itself on this one. And then just reinstall the hanger. I'd say 4 to 5 Newton meters on this one. There isn't an exact torque spec, but you don't want to go super tight on this. Once the wheel is installed with the axle, it's going to go ahead and tighten everything down anyhow. And then you got your little tiny backup bolt. So I hope this helps you. And again, every full suspension bike, all the major brands, they all make noise at some point. It's not just our bikes. So if you're good with tools, you can do a complete overhaul anybody can do the quick fix with the oil, but if you're not confident, just take it to a shop. That's part of owning a full suspension bike, is having to deal with those noises at some point. So I hope you can do at least one of these fixes in your garage.